Bows of Gloves here, and this is the 11th video in the Harmor from the Ground Up tutorial series. And today we're going to be talking about the pitch section. So, to start off, I've learned a few nifty things from the result of school. And I guess first let's talk about octave and hertz. So we're going to be talking about our pitch today, and we're going to talk about a few concepts. So we have Hertz mode. This is weighted. So as you see, it's being logarithmically put on our graph. Octave is not weighted. Hertz is weighted, at least for the pitch, and I'm assuming it's the same way for wherever else you see a hertz. And octave is unweighted, which is a little strange to me, but okay. So we have pitch, and that is all that those do. They change the way our pitch is interpreted. So right now it's just sending frequencies out linearly, and this is logarithmically putting frequencies out, which is how we're used to hearing frequencies. So that's good. Now, I learned something recently, and it makes sense. It is that we have our low note here. This is called the fundamental. Go watch my DSP series if you don't know what I'm talking about right now. But then you have all these upper notes, and these are called overtones. But they have more specific names that in the past I've kind of used interchangeably. But I've recently learned that anything that is a multiple of the fundamental, meaning 1 times or 2 times or 3 times and so on, up are called harmonics. Anything that is in the overtone series forming up the timbre of our sound, but is not a multiple, is called a partial. So if we move our frequency around, we're moving the entire note, all its overtones around. So if we and we could do much smaller changes, and you can hold down Alt and click to return it to its 0 value, and you could divide it so you can bring it down an octave if you want. So those are options, and you're moving, as you can see, the entire spectrum. However, you could choose to leave the fundamental where it's at and just move the overtones. As you can see, our fundamental is steady as could be, but our overtones are changing, and it's kind of cool because you are now moving them through partial territory, and that is nifty. You can also take them down an octave as well, and you get some really weird timbres when you do stuff like that. Now, we have an envelope. If you right-click, go to Edit Articulator, it will take you to this pitch envelope, and it's the same as the other envelopes. You put in points, and it reads it over time. And so we could turn it on, and we could put a pitch bend sliding up. And if we turn our envelope on, so you could create lasers and things. You can also, so this envelope right here says this applies all the way. If we turn it to the middle, it will not apply at all. If we turn it on just a little, you hear it taking effect. If we turn it the other way, it will take the inverse of the directions we're giving it. So instead of pitch bending up, it'll pitch bend down. And you can clearly see that here. It's a pretty fast pitch bend. Let's do this. If we do it the other way. So that is all that does. We're going to turn our envelope off. Now we have this vibrato option. Pretty nifty option if you ask me. And what it does is if you hold it down, if you're familiar with vibrato, like a flute player or whatever, they'll play a straight tone, but if it's like a long note and they're playing a solo and being fancy, they'll modulate the pitch up and down just a little bit. And you can set how much of that, so they can modulate it through other notes if they really wanted to. That'd be pretty difficult for a flute player, but with the depth, we can set how far we want our modulation to be. So right now, there's no vibrato on. If we turn on slowly, it'll begin to modulate little by little until it's going up and down between one note and another note. And you can see right there, it makes this funky sine wave pattern. And you can change the speed at which this pattern is, the frequency of this vibrato, just by moving the speed. So it's essentially an LFO for the pitch. So that is something that's really useful for making solos and things like that. I've used it before. Great tool. Then you have this legato. So down here, you have these different options. If you're not familiar with these types of options, you have legato, which on like a clarinet, if you were to play some notes, but you were to move your fingers while sustaining your breath, so you keep blowing even though you're changing notes, you get this blur between notes. You go do or something like that. I don't know. And it's called legato playing. On violin and other stringed instruments, it's when you play notes through the same bow. You do not restrike the strings. I don't know. I don't play string instruments, so that may have been like the wrong terminology, but hopefully you understood. So we have our legato. And so now when we play notes, and if we hold down the keys, we don't lift them up, you see it blurs through them. And this legato setting, this is actually relative to legato and porta, are the ones we're going to talk about today, is relative to this. The way this interacts is relative to the settings you have over here. So right now it's going pretty quick, but if we turn our time way up, you see it takes a way longer time to blur to our next note. Now, if we were to make it linear, so that's what these two do. So it switches from a linear mode to a logarithmic mode. See, I kind of wish they had just put these signs everywhere, because that would just be easier than this whole octave and hertz thing. But as you see, linear, that's a logarithmic. Linear is much less forgiving. It does not weight your changes. So if you're looking for that, that's the thing. I usually keep mine on logarithmic just because that's more of what I expect to happen. So then we have these two modes down here. This one is relative time. So if we play a low note, this will change how our legato setting interacts with the notes we play. So if we play a note, that's going to be our starting note, and we play the next note over, it's going to glide to that note according to the time setting, but because the note's closer, it'll glide there much faster, as you can see. But if we were to play a farther note, and granted we have long time setting to help us see this, so if we're going to play this note and it's like some note over here, it'll take much longer to glide to. Versus gliding back and forth is much longer. This is a fixed variable time if you select this option. So it doesn't care how far the notes are. It's going to take this amount of time that you've set here to move around. And you can actually see up here in the hint window the time that you've set. So this is going to take 93 milliseconds regardless of how far the notes are. So that's how that works. And yes, 93 milliseconds is quite noticeable. So you should have a pretty hearable difference. And then you have this limit option, and it has to work with portamento on. So make sure you have your portamento on. And what it does is, so a portamento is, it'll take the two end notes, it will blur them. So, or crossfade, whatever term you want to use. It fades one out and fades the other in, and it gives you a real, if we turn our, and you can hear it working. It's very useful for leads and things. It moves the pitch between them. It glides the pitch. So this limit setting affects this, and so do all these other settings that we've already got set here. And you can actually have legato on. Now, I didn't explain legato, but legato, if you play two notes, it will go back and forth, up and down through them. If you play an instrument that had legato capabilities, and you're very familiar with that. Portamento, however, you could re-trigger the note. So you could play a polyphonic line. Legato is monophonic, only one note at any one time. So if we turn our portamento on, and we have this limit option, this affects how much the portamento affects our range. And I believe it works from the top down. So right now our limit's all the way on, so there is no limit. We've set no threshold. And if we were to turn on our limit, and I've never really used the limit, but I know that's what it's supposed to do. So if you have any knowledge about the limit, drop it in the comments. So yes. And then of course we have that weird octave thing. Man, that looks funky. All right, so let's make a quick lead thing. I'm just going to play like one measure, but. And we're going to take our timing, bring it down, make it fixed. And we could turn our reverb on, and we're going to, oh, you know, there are a few envelopes I didn't talk about. I did talk about the frequency option. We're not going to use that here. Whoops. Let me make sure there's nothing here. Oh, look at this. In this menu here, it tells you the processed and active partials. That's kind of cool. I'm not sure if that's actually what it does because I looked at it for like 30 seconds, but it's like whatever. So we're turning our pitch on, and there's this thing. If you go here, edit articulator, you have unison pitch thickness. So right now it's all the way on, meaning that this knob has complete effect, but you could put an envelope on it to tell it to turn it off over time. So we could put it up really high, which normally would sound like that, but we can have each note trigger and then turn off really fast. And so we get a harder attack. So that's a really nifty way of using that. And so yeah, we just do. And then if we could repeat it one more time and go like this, whoops, and go like that. Man, it's doing it again. Don't know what the deal is. Now this would not work on a legato, but that's because I explained. So if we come over here to so we have pitch, vibrato, depth. So if we did use vibrato, we could set an envelope to control the depth. So how fast it turns on or off. We could start this all the way on and turn it off over time if that's a desire we have. So we have to turn our depth on though, which it doesn't make a huge difference here. It's just a little one. And we already talked about unison pitch thickness, which has to do with the unison pitch. I don't believe I talked about that last time. So that's that. And so yeah, that's just an idea for a lead sound. You may or may not be into this style of music, but it's like whatever. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. Any accusations, drop those in the comments. Any compliments as well, of course, put those in their proper sections, and subscribe and have a blessed day.